Hi, everybody. So welcome to the first section of Project Pipeline Office Hour in 2021. My name is Duy, and today we are together with my colleague Shazron Abdullah. We are presenting the topic of debugging Project Pipeline apps. As well as we will answer some Q&As in the end. All right. So again, welcome. And this is our agenda for today office hours. First of all, we will walk through an overview of debugging tools for Project Pipeline applications. And then my colleague Shazron will go through a demo to show you how to use the debugging tools in practice. And we will end with the office hour so that you can raise questions for any problem first. All right, the first one, for debugging Project Pipeline applications, you can leverage a few tools provided out of the box. The first one is the AIO CLI. So that comes with a few sub-modules that help you to interact with the application, runtime events, and the console, and so on. The second one is logs, which you can use to print the logs to your during the activation of your action, as well as print logs to the UI. You can also leverage the debugger that comes out of the box when you initiate a new Project Pipeline application or any third-party debugger. And finally, we have a community that connect you guys as users of Project Pipeline, as well as our team who are ready to answer any question from you. So first of all, let's recap what it means by an activation. So Project Pipeline run on our runtime, which is a serverless framework. And on our runtime, each action invocation results in an activation record. So an activation can be blocking, which is synchronous. So it waits for the activation result to be available before it returns the response to the user. The blocking activations are usually web actions, which are used to serve the UI in SDAs, and the default timeout of blocking activations is 60 seconds. It is also the max timeout because you don't usually if something is more than 1 minute, it's no longer a web request. And the second type of activation is non-blocking or asynchronous. So it works in a fire and forget manner. Doesn't mean that the activation will be forgotten, but when you invoke an action, it just returns the activation ID only. And then you can later use that activation ID to pull the activation result or the logs of your invocation. Non-blocking activations are usually useful for headless applications. For example, when you need to process an image or a Photoshop files, that could take a good 10 minutes. So the default timeout of a non-blocking activation is 60 seconds. But you can, of course, configure that up to 30 minutes based on your requirements. And then on the right-hand side, you see an example JSON object of an activation record. The most important here is the activation ID, which is kind of a primary key you can use to retrieve the activation record as well as the logs. And it also contains the duration of the activation, start and end time, some more metadata about the name, the namespace, and the response. So in this example, it is a success response 200, but it could also be 400, 401, 500, and so on. We will look into that in more detail in the next slides. So here are some useful CLI comments that you will need to interact with the activations. The first one is AIO runtime activation list, which is used to get the list of the latest activations of your app. And then in each line of the activation list, you will have the activation ID that you can further use to call activation get for the activation record that we see in the previous slide, which return the JSON format of the record. Or you can use activation logs to get the standard logs, the standard out log of the activation during execution, and the AIO app logs, which is kind of a shortcut of the activation logs, because here you don't need the activation ID. It just returns you the logs from the latest activations of your app. Here are the activation status that you would get from an activation. The first one is success, which means that the action executed successfully. We will see more on that in the next slide. The second type of application of status is the application error, and in this case, the action was invoked, but it returned an error value by so it returned an error on purpose. For example, when your action code throws some exceptions that are not caught by the code, or there are some preconditions on the arguments that are not met. Let's say you have an undefined JSON object, and you try to get some attribute from that object. Usually, in order to debug application error, you could use the AIO runtime activation log comment, and then you see the details what are happening inside the activation, including like the exceptions and so on. The third type of error is developer error, and this error. So in this case, the action was invoked, but it stopped abnormally. And what it means, for example, in the case of syntax error, or you have some variable that are failed to initialize, some modules not found, not imported, and also execution timeout. For example, if you exceed the 60 seconds of the activation. And in order to troubleshoot this kind of error, you may use the AIO runtime activation get, which will say why it stopped interruptedly. The last type of error is something you might not see, but just to complete the picture, which is the internal error. And in this case, the system was unable to invoke the action. For example, when there's not enough CPU or memory, you would not you would likely not see in this type of error, because runtime is scalable, and it should scale up the resources based on load. So there's always enough resources to invoke the action. All right, so for logging of the action, by default, there's no activation record and logs for the successful web action. So the actions that has the success status. And the reason for that is to make sure that we have a good performance in the production environment, where you don't need like the log for all the requests for the users. But in case for the development purpose, you may want to debug something, and there's a need to enable the activation record and logs. And in this case, you would add a customized header, X out of you extra login to your web request, in order to force the activation and logs being persisted. And just a note here is that those will be persisted for 7 days only, and after that they will be removed. So if you don't see your logs after 7 days, it just means that it's expired. As part of Project Firefly, there's a login SDK. So when you do app init, like you create a new application with AIO app init, that comes kind of out of the box. So you don't need to import anything extra. And in the template code that is generated by the comment, you could also see how the logger is initialized and then customized with your desired log level. So there are different log levels that you can leverage from this logger, including error, warning, info, and so on. And the next module that you can use for debugging is the Wiz Debug. So it is for debugging and live development of Apache OpenWiz actions. So this tool is open source. It also comes out of the box in all Firefly apps, integrated into VS Code. So you don't need to do anything extra. Shao will walk through detail how to use this tool in the demo. Just a small remarks here is that it's currently not working if you use state or the files SDK. We are proactively working on kind of a plugin to help that. So stay tuned. For debugging UI, we don't have anything. It's not something specific to Firefly, but it's more like a generic concept. So you can use console.log to log the value of your object. You could also leverage the network tab in your browser to inspect the traffic of the application, or you could set breakpoints in the code so that the browser will stop accordingly. And finally, we have the community, as said before. So please join the Project Firefly forum on Experience League. Our team is there, and a lot of users are also active there. For any questions, feel free to us, and we can follow up with answers. And there are also documentations, especially about troubleshooting some common issues with Project Firefly. There's also a code lab that go into detail about how debugging Project Firefly works. And otherwise, if you have any problems, you can also file GitHub issues in our repo, either with a CLI or SDK or something. And with that, let me hand over to Shah for the demo. Shah, up to you.
Great, thanks, Duy. Let me share my screen here. Okay, so I'll be going through how to debug Firefly app using two methods. The first method will be through the logging SDK. The second method will be through the debugger via Visual Studio Code. So here I have a very simple Firefly app with some runtime actions, and also some static assets like a website that will run the action. So in here is just a simple HTML, CSS project, and I have two actions here, one generic and hello. Hello is just a hello world example for me to demonstrate the debugging capabilities. And it's all defined in the manifest. Right now, I'll explain more later, but the log levels, we're going to be looking at a hello world action. I've set the log level as debug, which will be important soon. So I have a hello world action here, and I want to debug it. So there's a command in the AIO CLI called AIO app run. This will run the app using a local HTTP server, and also deploy the action to runtime. So let me run it first, and then I'll explain how to get the results from the logging SDK to show up. I'll give it a second here. It might take 10 seconds. So at first it will build your actions, and then after your actions are built, it will deploy it automatically to Adobe IO runtime. And as you can see here, it built the website also, and will run it locally. So after it's run, it will give you two URLs. You can view it in the Experience Cloud shell, and if you run your app in there, if you're debugging, you want to use the an access token in your code, for example, you run it using the Experience Cloud shell. But right now, I'm going to just run it locally, and I will load this in Chrome. So this is an action runner. This is the website I told you that is built as a default website when you create a Firefly app. So in here, automatically will show you all the actions you have. So I'm going to run the hello world action I just created. I'll step through the code a little bit here, but let me just run it first and see the output. So we'll call the action. Might take some time. Okay. So here it returned some JSON with hello world. My name is undefined, which is clearly wrong. It should just say hello world if you didn't pass a name value, and it definitely shouldn't say undefined. So let me just pass in some parameters. Let me pass in my name and invoke it again. Oh, it didn't show my name. So let's take a look at the code. See what was going wrong. Let me go back to Visual Studio Code. So this is the hello action. Right now, let's see the code. I've instantiated a logger. Do we show you a little bit of this? And the log level is passed in dynamically. Right now, this log level is set in your manifest. So I have it set as debug. So anything debug and above should be showing. Let's go back to that code. So I show this log message and also this debug message, and it should show in the console. So when you run it, at the EIO app run at the end, it showed the two URLs, and it's also running a log poller. So it will poll for your logs. So you can see here, where's the debug message? Yeah. Debug the name parameter is undefined for the first time where I didn't pass it. And for the second one, it said the name parameter is Shaz. So it got the name parameter. So, but it's still not returning me the right message. So how can we debug this further? So besides debug logging, we can step through the code, and let me demonstrate that right now. So when you do AIO app run, it will set up a launch configuration for Visual Studio Code automatically. It's here, so you don't have to worry about it, but it's automatically setting up all the different launch configurations for all your actions and even your web assets. So if you go to your Run tab in Visual Studio for your project, you'll see at the top there's a selection list that will show you all the launch configurations for all your actions, and you can even run the launch configuration for just the web assets, or all the actions, or all the actions and the web assets. So for example, if I go back here, in my hello action, I can set a breakpoint at the first logger. So let's do that and run it. I choose the hello action, press start. So it's going to run the debugger here. Let's show it to you. So after the debugger has started, it will say at the bottom, ready for activations. Started in 9 seconds. So now we will have to activate the action. So we will go back to the action runner webpage that we have here. So let's run hello world again. I'll just invoke it without any parameters, and we'll go back here, and you'll see, okay, it got the activation, but it's now loading action sources. It's doing some things. It might take 10 seconds up to 30 seconds for everything to load. Give it a moment here. Okay, load it. You go back to your action here. It's already stopped at a breakpoint. So the thing with Adobe IO runtime is this debug session. Adobe IO runtime itself will time out after 1 minute, but you can still debug through this, so it will not affect your debug session. It's just the runtime result here will time out, but you can still continue. So let's try to step through this. So we didn't pass through anything here. Let me go back to debug here. So let me just delete everything here. So you can use all the debug facilities in Visual Studio. For example, you can inspect what was passed in through params here. You can hover, inspect. If you want to just watch a specific variable, it's undefined. We didn't set anything. So I'm just gonna continue without doing anything right now. Okay. So let's look at the result. It's already timed out, but let's try activating it again now by passing in the name. And let's debug why this function is not working. And we'll do invoked it. Go back here. Okay, so it's stopped at the first breakpoint, and we can step through. So we know that params.name is set. So if params.name is set, it should set the message here at the second breakpoint, right? So step through. Oh, so it didn't go through this part. So if we quickly inspect why, it's obviously there's a logic error here. It should be if params.name, not if not params.name. So I'll stop the debugging session here and just edit it and just save it. And let's wait for a while here because we have an action watcher that will redeploy the action. So you don't need to, stop and start the server. So let's wait till it deploys again. Okay, so it's finished deploying. Let's debug it again. Okay, so let's go back to the, okay, so ready for activations. Let's activate it again, passing the name parameter and invoke it. Okay, it's loading the action sources. Okay, load it in 20 seconds. It should stop it at the first breakpoint. Okay, so now we know that params.name is set, so it should go into this block here. So let's just continue to that block. So it does go into that block. Let's step out of it, and you can see the message is correct now. Hello world, my name is Shaz. So let's just continue. And you can see now the function is correct. Let me do one more thing for web debugging. So this whole page here, welcome to Hello World, is part of the project, and we can do debugging of this project. So we choose web and actions. And debug that web page. Okay, so if you go to your web source here, you can see your web page. Let's go to the JavaScript file. We have utils.js loaded. So there's this one function called action web invoke. So that this will be invoked whenever you invoke an action. So I've already have a breakpoint there. So let me go back to the correct one. No, this one. So let me just do that again. Okay, so you can see here it stopped at the breakpoint in the JavaScript in the web page itself. So you can do the same debugging introspection step through. So without going through the developer console in Chrome or console logs. You can still use console logs, obviously. One thing I want you to take note here is our action runner webpage automatically sets that special header to on. So all successful activations, like you see here, you see all these login. These are all successful activations. and they're showing the logs because of that header. That's the extent of my demo. Let me go stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Sha. That was great to see. All right, so now we go to the next section, which is the office hour. And if you guys have any questions about your about debugging specifically, or any other questions about Firefly apps, then feel free to post in the chat box or in the Q&A session. So we do have a few pre-submitted questions that we can get started. So the first question is, my action return 500 server error. How to know what went wrong with that error? So 500 server error is something. Well, it either go from the default code that you created your action in the template when you first created the application. There's a default try catch block in the code, in the template code, and whenever something wrong happen in the try block, then the catch will be called, and then it automatically return a server error. So in order to investigate what went wrong, then because there's a log message in the code there, so you can go to the console and then use AIO runtime activation logs, and then you get the ID of the invocation to investigate what is going on in the logs. And there could be also some exceptions that are thrown from the action code. So yeah, so from the log message, you can find different reasons why that failed. Is there any other questions that we got here? All right, another one for the SDK. So it looks like something went wrong when I used the SDK, specifically the campaign SDK. Is there a way to look into details? Sha, because you wrote the SDK before, so do you have some idea on this one?
Yeah, like in the logging SDK, so in your action itself, you can set the log levels in your manifest.yml, and it should output extra debugging info when you activate your action. So set the log level. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another pre-submit question before we look into the chat box. So my action has error out, but there are no logs. Okay, so from what I've seen, there are different errors of an action being error out. One of them is, for example, the server error 500 that I mentioned before. And the way to go with that is to get the logs to see what went wrong. If there's no log, it's also possible that you got a developer error, like what I mentioned in the slide. And the reason for that is something might be wrong in the code. Let's say the syntax error, or some modules are not found, are not imported properly into the action. And usually that that error will be returned from in the activation record. So by using the AI or runtime activation yet command, you will get the activation record with the error message why it actually failed for the developer error. Yeah, and also there might be other problems. For example, the timeout, and from the activation record or the activation list comment, you can check if that is more than 60 seconds, while your default timeout is 60 seconds, then it's obviously a timeout, and there might be no logs in that as well. Might be in the action you try to connect to a third-party system or API, and that one timeout. So yeah, that also make your action timeout on high runtime. Okay, so there's a question that I've seen multiple times about how to authenticate an action. There's we have a documentation on the security overview of Project Firefly. I will share with you in the chat box so that so that you can have a read. But basically, for authentication with Project Firefly, there are two scenarios. Either you have a headless app that require you to pass the server authentication because basically there's no user there. So you need a JWT token that will be passed to the action in order to be authorized. Or there's the SPA app with the UI. Then your application will run on the Experience Cloud Shell, and in that one, the Cloud Shell already provide the user context along with the user token, so that the UI of the Firefly app will take that and pass on to the backend action, and then in the backend action it will be authorized to access that like the other services, the other Adobe services that are seen. There's also the probably I should share my screen so that it's easier to highlight what I mentioned with the authentication. And especially what you should also notice in the so this is a manifest file of an application, just my simple application, and in here you have the Adobe require Adobe auth. I currently set to fail false, which means that there's no authentication protected for this action. But if you set it as true, then the activation will be protected by an action that require you to pass a token in. So yeah, so let me share the documentation about that so that you can read more about authentication. All right, so I think that we don't have any further questions for today. And I would say thank you very much for attending. And we look forward to seeing you in the next office hours of Project Firefly. Have a good day. Bye-bye.